The mock interview candidate we have this week is a product manager. And I love this question for product managers because it really helps zero in on their analytic and kind of product sensibilities, analytic frameworks and the product sensibilities. I do want to apologize ahead of time. Listening back to the video as I make this video, there's typing noise. My keyboard was old, needed some oil, whatever. And it's tough on the ears. I apologize. I'll try to remove it in post. I don't think I can at this point. And so I apologize ahead of time. The specific question I'm asking this candidate is about a time when I had to make a pivot or restart while they were well down the path of a project. And the reason why this question matters so much for product managers is walk me through your framework for how you're managing, usually indirectly, a large team of resources to achieve a goal. There's multiple parts to this. One, what was the outcome? Two, what's your framework? But three, how do you make decisions and why? And how do you think about success or not, right? And I make this case a bunch of times in the video because I'm recording this last. As a candidate, your job is to convince me you're very good at your job. You're very good at what you do. And that involves providing more information. With the candidates who work with me through my VIP program at Interview At, for their interview preparation, I tell them all the time, this is a very common go-do. It is important that you, as a candidate, make no assumptions about my knowledge or understanding about where you work, the products you work on, the industry you're in, none of that. Okay, for a couple of reasons. One, my role could maybe not align with yours. I am a product manager, so in this case, it's product manager, but you might be interviewing with dev manager, you might be interviewing with marketing, you might be interviewing with customer success, whatever. But also you might be interviewing outside of your specific vertical. So make no assumptions about what the interviewer knows about what you did or why you did it. You must always be over-explaining, not rabbit holes, but over-explaining what you did and why you did it in order to make the case that you have sufficiency and competency in your job. It's also important that you employ some sort of structure in your answer. Situation, task, action, result. It's a three-part story that you need to work through. And I would say that in this case, the candidate doesn't do a great job. So kind of keep a lookout for that and how they're walking through their answer. It's reasonable content, but definitely would have benefited from more structure built around the STAR format. If you haven't seen the video, you can go look at my playlist. I have a 4-part video playlist about using the STAR format in an FAQ kind of setup for how to prepare your answers. So with that, let's jump into the interview. As always, you can support the channel by working with me directly with my VIP service or gaining access to the content library, which has many, many more of these interviews. This is more about a pivot or a restart, right? Where you were working towards a goal on a project completion, right? And you were more than halfway there, but due to unforeseen circumstances, new direction handed down based on, or you basically saw an unexpected outcome that then caused you to say, uh-oh, maybe we're going the wrong direction. We need to retool, rethink this. But you were more than halfway there, but had to change direction. What comes to mind? Real quick here. I want, if you're watching this and you want to understand this question and why it's asked, okay, there's a huge difference between goal attainment and right goal attainment, right? Especially if you're a product manager. It's very easy to get caught up in like, these are all the tasks and these are all the things we need to do. But sometimes it's really important to be able to discern what is the right set of goals versus all the goals and narrow that down to make the right choice.
Okay. And do you want an example where we had to sort of move away and shut it down, deprioritize it?
Not shut it down, just change what you were doing, right? You realized the path you were on was path A, and you needed to fork your path and go to A prime as a way to actually get to the right answer. Okay.
Yeah, I can give you a situation. So we were building a strategic, what we called unified auction product that did not at the time exist in the market specifically for CTV publishers. And we started down the path of working on what was called Prebid, prebid.org, which has a library, an open source library of code that we thought that we could leverage because they were working with us as part of a small consortium of getting as many ecosystem players as possible to transact in the most functional, efficient, and transparent way. So we went down the path of looking at the capabilities.
But transact for what? I'm sorry.
Transact for the content. So it was trying to plug in as many demand sources or as many DSPs in this most simplest way possible into this unified auction, which again, as a product, did not exist at the time.
Okay.
We spent about 3-4 months getting the code set up, because what we found is that even though it was open source library, and through conversations with their product managers and their tech leads, this is the prebid.org folks, they told us that some of the functionality is already there, or they're developing it, and they would be able to push it pretty quickly. We looked at how to set up those servers and some of the logic and some of those libraries on our side. And what we found is that there was actually a lot of missing pieces based on some of our other experience with live streaming and CTV content that we would have to build ourselves. So we spent an extra 3 months at that time to try to kind of plug in or patch some of the problem areas that we saw in this open source code. And at that time, what had happened, this was toward the end of the year, this was right around January timeframe, there was another player, Publica, who came on board and actually basically announced the product that we were building. They announced it in such a way that they already had publishers, several large content owners and content creators on their platform testing with them. And we were still probably about a quarter out from when we would be able to be kind of code complete, just because we had to patch so many things in this code. So that's when we started to reevaluate whether we should keep going down that path, which was basically a competitor product, right? Or whether we should kind of try to pivot away, or just fully shut it down and maybe figure out a partnership with Publica. So does that make sense so far?
It does. Yep.
Okay. So we went on to the three options that I just mentioned. We went to evaluate them, right? Like going down that path, we still had a little bit of an unknown in front of us. We estimated it would take 3 months. It could take a little bit longer to just be dev complete. This is without any testing or any publishers really signed up for this at the time. And the decision that we made was that going forward with it, having spoken to Publica as well as a couple of shared partners that we had that would be using their product, they seem to be much further ahead. They did not start on the open source library. They actually built everything from scratch because it was just easier for them to do. And we decided not to go head to head and compete with it, because this was a really, from what we heard, and we also saw a demo of this product that they built, was self-service. It was faster, more efficient than ours. And we decided to just completely shut down the project. So we were, in the time frame you asked, more than 50% there. We were about 6 months into a nine-month cycle, so pretty far into it. And we decided to shut it down and instead partner with Publica and leverage behind the scenes their tech stack with our SSP capabilities.
I'll be honest. I always go through my notes when I'm doing these. This is a couple years old now, and I'm listening back again for the first time in a couple of years. And it's sometimes I align in what I was thinking back then, and sometimes I don't. But one of the notes I had here was, insofar as stories go and story choices that you make in an interview, this one is a bit of a weird one, and I still stand by that, because the question is about having to pivot or restart as a product manager, right? And that's usually because you're building something, new data comes in, something, right? That causes you to reevaluate the path that you're on. And if this is the only story the candidate had for this particular type of question, that's fine. There's really nothing you can do about that. But this is now kind of a discussion for everyone else who's watching. This question is meant to target externalities, not really of a competitive nature, meaning a competitor did something and so we reacted. Maybe your customer preferences are changing. You got new information from customer interviews. New technology was discovered. New technology got introduced, which could dramatically change how you're building things. Something of that like. But when you're dealing with a potential competitive situation and it's, you're evaluating that against your own in-house solution, and then you make a decision to partner with them because you kind of throw your hands up and say, we're not going to be able to compete. It is possible, and he hasn't made the case yet, but it is possible that this competitor was so far ahead that it was like, okay, we had to throw up our hands and say no. But that's not, it's not a great story in the context of an interview for a couple of reasons. One, they gave up and they moved on. and they abandoned 6 months of development work, right? So he hasn't, at this point, the candidate has not yet at this point discussed any of the costs involved, how many developers they had. There's a bit of sunk cost fallacy, I get that, but hasn't really kind of framed it up as, we did all this work, was it worth it to switch off, right? Also has not framed up why, right? It's kind of a weak argument he's made so far for why to abandon the existing work. And so what, and this is now the second reason, what hasn't been put on display yet to this point in the interview is the critical thinking that, especially for a product manager, that I would be looking for, or anybody who's interviewing you would be looking for, to evaluate your ability to process all these inbound signals and then make decisions about what you're doing. And in making a switch out to some third party, especially a new stack, it is unclear what that path looks like, how hard it's going to be, whether or not it's the right, like he just hasn't made that case yet. And so in the context of this question, when you're thinking about stories that you can tell, it's far easier to talk about what's happening within the walls of your company and making decisions as a product manager within your product groups and how you're kind of evaluating resourcing and product direction, customer inputs, et cetera, versus some third party that you have zero control over, that you evaluated, but like, who knows what that really meant? Because again, he didn't make the case. And what that could mean long-term for you, it's almost reliant on the kind of deal you can cut, which in this case, it's not clear if this person's in charge of that, a biz dev person's in charge of that, someone more senior in the company. So there's so many things here that are kind of out of the product manager's control that it's just not a great story choice. So this is not about the candidate did a bad job in the answer. That's not what this is about. This is about helping you understand, when you're selecting your stories, what's going to paint you in the best light. And a question like this is designed to understand how you, as a product manager, deliver results through indirect management or direct management, depending on how your team structures are set up, of a product, service, et cetera, through your actions and analysis. And in some ways, that's just not what happened here. So it's for story choice, I'm not that psyched about it. Let's see how he progresses through the rest of the interview. And so when you think about when you got to a decision point, how were you defining success or failure of the project?
Yeah, well, for us, it was kind of being first to market at the time. Like I mentioned, we were really excited about the open source libraries. We could just leverage everything that another consortium was building, and trying to kind of bypass that a little bit, given that experience that we already had doing live stream monetization, right, to overlay our stack capabilities. But we ended up falling short. And so that criteria for being first to market with this unique solution is what made us kind of pivot away and divest from the solution, and instead pursue a closer partnership with a potential competitor.
Let's talk about time to market as an evaluative, man, I'm going to have trouble saying that word, as a as a way to evaluate whether or not you're making good decisions. A lesser experienced, or perhaps even not great product manager, when talking about metrics for success, we'll talk about being first to market. And unfortunately has been proven in tech over and over and over and over again. Being first to market is not the axis along which you can define success, because it rarely holds, right? Excite, Lycos, Yahoo, I mean, these were all search engines that existed before Google. Turns out Google got it right. They were not even close to first to market and absolutely buried the competition. There were plenty of smartphones with keyboards and even apps, Windows CE phones, and others like it. And iOS and the iPhone completely buried it. We're not first to market. So there's many examples of where being first to market is not the determinative factor for success. And going with that in this context, in your answer as a product manager, what you're basically saying is you're not really willing to discuss business results. Okay, okay, fine. Even the discussion of market share, right, and wanting to maintain or build or whatever, it's kind of an afterthought in this discussion. But there was no discussion here where this candidate was clear about how they were going to define success. So it is someone else did something out of my control, made me panic because my only success factor is first to market. Therefore, we abandon 2/3 of the work that we had projected for this project to go take on some unknown amount of work by connecting to some other third party that we've determined is already better than us and we can't keep up. That's not a growth mindset. It may ultimately have proven to be the right decision, but in the context of how this candidate is making their case, and in an interview answer, what I'm hearing is we had a very simplistic view for how we were going to define success. We panicked when somebody else came into the market. Certainly, we took the time to look at it, and without really any kind of an evaluation matrix, what this candidate has done has declared that the competitor was better. Okay, and so we're just going to abandon all this work, and we're just going to go work with them. And that's a deal, biz dev deal, whatever the contract is for how you're using them. However that ends up taking shape may not be in any part of the kind of responsibility matrix for this product manager. Therefore, what has he actually told me in this interview? Because that is the key when you're watching these videos. That is the key, is how do you win your interview, right? He may have ultimately been right. He has not made the case in the interview. Your job in the interview is to convince me, the interviewer, that you know what you're doing, you're very good at your job, and that we are crazy not to hire you. And so in the context of what the information presented in this interview so far, not quite there. But let me just restate that. Your success metric was being first to market. That's it?
At the time, yes, because it didn't exist. It is something that we saw really valuable for publishers for live streaming. When we talked to them about capabilities that we were looking to bring on board, and or some of the solutions that brought in their direct sales against our programmatic capabilities into a unified auction that could show them, follow the dollar of like, hey, this is where the bids are coming from this particular platform. This is how much for this channel, for this device. It was a unique offering that we were looking to do. We didn't know what some of the other competitors were doing at the time, but it was to kind of get first to market, and then I wouldn't say corner the market, but get a pretty large market share of it, at least 25-50% as kind of a success for that story. But because we were still so far behind, and there was already a competitor out with a much better product, that's when we kind of started pumping the brakes and reevaluating.
So as an interviewer, I know that there's nothing following on this. So this was the end of this interview question block. What this candidate did not do is explain why first to market mattered. He talked in vague terms that, well, customers said they wanted. Okay, fine. But like, again, we've already made the case that being first to market doesn't really matter. He sort of tried to frame it as get to market first, corner the market, 25 to 50% market share, which is, to take 25 to 50% of any market in any short time window is an astronomical growth rate, unless it's a very, 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 very new market, in which case being first to market doesn't matter unless you can make the case that there are large moats to be created as a result of signing customer deals and kind of being in the market. So if you are going to use a story like this as a product manager in an interview to make the case that you restarted, pivoted, made a good decision with your product direction, you absolutely have to discuss how you are going to define success. First to market, not good enough, need to have more. 2, if you are going to hang your entire case on first to market, you have to make the case that market share is sticky, customers are sticky, switching costs are high, and there's some moat that you're creating as a result of being in the market. There's a guy that I used to work for at Microsoft, one of the VPs, who very, very successful within the context of Microsoft. And now he's the CEO of a healthcare services business. But one of the things he said that has always stuck with me is you can never, 100% never outsource a core competency and expect to run the market, right? In this case, they want to get to market first. They failed. Someone else got to market first. And then they're going to partner with that person and still hope to get 25 to 50. Like the math doesn't math, right? You can't take significant market share if you're partnering with someone else who's basically in the same space as you and using their stuff in your back end. Whatever form this takes, it's very, very hard to then control your own destiny. You don't control the platform. You don't control the features. You don't control the communication with customers, quality of service. There's any number of things on the back end of this discussion that I would poke at and say, what about? But in an interview, you don't have that kind of time. If you have a 1 hour meeting with a bunch of senior managers, yeah, you got that time. But in an interview, you have given, if you get asked a question like this, you have at best 5 to 15 minutes to kind of make the case that you know what you're doing. And in this instance, what this candidate did was, we need to be first market. Someone else came into the market. We panicked. We partnered. And so we're going to still hope to get big market share. If I'm interviewing this candidate and I'm thinking about a product or service in my company, I would have a really hard time saying that this candidate, like I would pound the table for this candidate, because at no part during this analysis did they make the case that they made the right decisions. And where they did try to make the case, they presented weak arguments. We had to be first to market. That was our metrics for success. And they were a better product. How? Why? There's just no discussion here. So you, as a candidate, need to provide depth of field in your thinking, how you got to the answer. Do not, under any circumstance, assume that an interviewer knows what you're thinking or why you did something. You're literally in a room trying to convince a person to hire you, which is either going to be for a promotion, right? You're going to a new company, a lateral hire with a pay increase or more responsibility, or just more responsibility. Like, you're basically talking to a new potential boss, asking for a raise, promotion, more responsibility, whatever, new title. You have to make the case, because this person does not know you. And at best, you have 60 minutes with them. At best. At worst, 30 minutes. And you have to make the case and do it definitively. And that means a clear framework for how you made your decisions, a clear framework for success as a product manager, right? Clear framework for how you're thinking about success. When you talk about tech stacks, what were the tech decisions that were being made? How are you evaluating a third party versus your own feature set? How are you talking to customers? How did you filter that matrix? How are you making decisions about the product, right? And then finally, once you've made your decision, what happened? There's no part of this is like, okay, what happened? And so the question here was, talk about a restart or a pivot and why. And I still don't know what happened. So I'm going to, this literally what would happen. I would finish with this candidate, and there's, maybe you get 2 or 3 questions, but I would walk out of the room after this and think, And then I'd go make my notes, right? Ahead of a candidate evaluation meeting where all of the people on the hiring would get together. And I would say, yeah, no, as a product manager, I mean, sure, they've managed a product. They did some things. I don't really feel very strongly about their analytic ability, their decision-making ability, and doing the right thing in a hard or complex or vague, ambiguous situation. Does that sound like a senior leader who's going to pound the table and say, we need to hire this person? No, of course not, right? And so that's, you have to keep that front and center of your mind. Your job is to convince me that you're awesome at what you do. And we would be crazy not to hire you. And unfortunately for this candidate, in this specific answer block, just didn't land, right? For all the reasons we talked about, just didn't land.